everyone, I'm Jessica Stutzman and welcome back to the Millcreek Government Channel. Lake Erie acts as an ever-present and beautiful backdrop to our daily lives. This body of water provides drinking water to more than 200,000 people, but also provides recreational fun for residents and tourists alike, which directly and indirectly support thousands of jobs across the region. Viewers, we must keep our Great Lake clean. Joining us today is Sarah Bennett, Campaign Manager for Clean Water Advocacy under the larger PennFuture organization. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's always fun having you on. You are a wealth of knowledge on environmental topics. The last time we spoke was about the impacts of cigarette butts, and now we want to talk about keeping Lake Erie clean. And of course, it's such an important resource. But before we dive into all of that, again, I did mention that you're with PennFuture. What is the mission of PennFuture if our viewers are not familiar with them?
So PennFuture is a statewide environmental advocacy organization. We are dedicated to upholding Pennsylvanians' constitutional rights to clean water, clean air, and preservation of the environment. So PennFuture just opened their 5th office here in Erie just this spring. So that's what I'm doing here.
Wonderful. And what is the difference? Again, we're going to talk a lot today about pollution. So what is the difference between point source and non-point source pollution?
So point source pollution comes from a source that we can identify. So we know, usually it's kind of maybe a big oil spill or something like that, where you know where that came from. And so it's easier to pinpoint, not necessarily easier to clean up, but easier to pinpoint. Non-point source pollution is much wider spread. It comes from a lot of different places. So for example, the fertilizer that we all put on our lawns. We know that it's on those lawns, but we can't say it comes from one lawn specifically. So that's an example of non-point source pollution.
Okay, and I did pull some statistics from the PennFuture website. Pennsylvania specifically has 8,600 miles of rivers and streams, 455 acres of lakes, and 400,000 wetlands. I think that's really impressive. I think we have a lot to work with, and as I mentioned before, it's just extremely important that we do everything at home. Again, whether we take different measures at home to keep that clean, or if there are certain laws that are passed to help us achieve these goals. One thing I wanted you to just touch on briefly: the 1972 Clean Water Act. What were the goals, and were they accomplished?
So that act, the goal was to cause all waters in the United States to be swimmable and fishable. It did a lot to make more waters swimmable and fishable, but we didn't accomplish having all of them, or even, most of them are, but it did not every single body of water is swimmable and fishable since that act was passed.
Okay, so there's still a lot of work to do. We have a lot of improvements to be made, and that's where PennFuture comes into the picture. And why did they decide to expand to Erie?
So one of the things that PennFuture recognized a few years ago was that they needed to do more work in small and mid-sized towns. And that's because that's where people live. There are people living there as well as the big cities. So PennFuture is also has offices in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and then Mount Pocono, because of the important waters that are in the Pocono Mountains, but also in Harrisburg. And in Harrisburg, we work closely with legislators. So expanding to smaller and mid-sized towns, we have a small city here in Erie, was important to reach more people, to better advocate for clean water, and make sure that more people are aware of the things that need to be done to protect our water. The other interesting thing is that the Erie region, the Lake Erie watershed, is different than other watersheds in Pennsylvania. So all of the other watersheds in Pennsylvania are large river watersheds. this is our connection to the Great Lakes. And it's a small little corner of Pennsylvania. And Erie, sometimes because we're further apart from the bigger cities, we're further apart from Harrisburg, we kind of get lost up here. And so one of the goals with PennFuture moving into Erie was to kind of close the geographic and social legislative distance between Erie and Harrisburg.
Mm-hmm. I have noticed that I travel down to Harrisburg, and I get the feeling that we do feel very far away from them. I feel like once you hit Center County, everything west of that sometimes can get lost. So I'm glad that you're in your position, and we certainly want to do everything we can to keep our Great Lake clean here. And your role as campaign manager for clean water advocacy, what does that mean? What do you do?
Sure. So the first thing I'm doing here in Erie is I've brought together a group of local organizations, and we're putting together what's called a common agenda for clean water advocacy. This is going to be a document that identifies 5 threats to clean water in the Lake Erie watershed, and then also recommends solutions at several different levels. So the solutions will be what can municipalities do, what can the county do, and really how can municipalities and the county work together to better protect our water resources. And then also what can we do at the state and federal levels. So the document, we're hoping to have it completed by the end of September. Once it's finished, then we'll be working together and with municipalities and the county and our state legislators to start to implement some policies that can better protect our water resources.
And September, the end of September is coming very quickly. I'm sure the COVID-19 pandemic has not made your life any easier. How has the pandemic affected your work?
So I started this position as everything was kind of locking down because of the pandemic. PennFuture was working remotely, starting pretty much right when I started with the organization. And so what I had to do was connect with organizations and connect with people, but I had to do it from my home office. So I've been connecting with people through email, through phone calls, and bringing people together that way. We've been successful. We've brought people together. We've had great Zoom conversations, but there are a lot of different organizations and people who I haven't been able to connect with because of the remote setup. So I know that there are a lot of people who I still need to reach and organizations who I still need to engage in order to be as successful as we can be.
And I do give everybody credit from working from home during the pandemic. I know we were working from home for several months, and my dining room table became my office. And it's not easy. It sounds like it's easy to work from home, but it's not easy. So good luck continuing to work from your home office there. And what will happen after the common agenda is completed?
So we're going to continue to bring as many organizations, non-governmental organizations, into the fold as we can. Continue to build relationships in the region and also with state legislators to make sure that we all can kind of get on the same page and recognize what the threats to clean water are and what can we do about it. So really just continuing to have conversations, build relationships, and then working towards some policies that can protect our water resources and ensure that as the Erie region kind of revitalizes itself and develops, we're doing it in a way that protects our water resources so that those resources that we rely on for the things that you mentioned at the beginning of our session today, it continues to be a resource, and it continues to be something to draw people here and also to support the businesses and residents who live here.
And what is your vision for Pennsylvania's Lake Erie watershed? Do you have any specific goals that you want to achieve out of this?
Yeah, so what I want, I think we all recognize at least on the surface, we recognize the importance of Lake Erie and Presque Isle Bay and our streams to our lives. And we recognize their importance to fishing and boating, recreation, and drawing tourists here too. What I don't think we all understand is that even though we're relying on those water resources, we need to protect those, we're impacting those water resources. So we need to make sure that we're protecting them as we rely on them. And so my goal is to, my hope, I guess, is to kind of raise the level of water protection in public discourse, raise that to being a number one priority for decision making, raise water protection to be a number one priority when we're making decisions in the region. At the same time, and this has been an important thing that we're incorporating, we want to make sure that these decision-making processes are as inclusive as possible, and I think that's part of this. It's really about kind of creating this more holistic view of the region and where we're going. So making sure that everyone is at the table, making sure that we're not just making decisions, for example, to bring more tourists, but we're also making decisions to that benefit the residents who are already here. So sometimes those decisions are separate, but if everyone's at the table, we can make decisions that are more inclusive and can help everyone. And so basically, this is kind of my long way of saying, I want environmental health and also human health to be at the forefront of decisions.
Mm-hmm. And that makes a ton of sense, the way that you explained that. I've had you on the show before, and again, your background is in biology. Mm-hmm. What do you see as the major threats? Again, our last conversation was about cigarette butts and litter. Is that one of the major threats to our lake, or are there a couple other things maybe that we're not thinking about?
Sure. So in this document, we've kind of prioritized these threats, and there's 5 threats that we've identified, and those are not the only threats, but they're these 5 threat categories, really. The number one threat, and cigarette butts and litter fit into this, is surface runoff. That's a really big category of pollution. But what it is as it rains or when snow melts, water moves over the surface over our land, our surfaces, our buildings, our roads, and as it moves over those surfaces, it picks up pollutants. So those pollutants might be fertilizer from our lawns, but also from agricultural fields. It can include pesticides. Again, it's important to remember those aren't just coming from agriculture, they're coming from from residents and businesses as well. It can be litter, it can be cigarette butts. So that's a really big category, but I've had a lot of conversations with state agencies, scientists working in the region, as well as environmental organizations, and that runoff, everyone has said, is the number one threat to water quality in the region. The reason for that is that it carries pollution that we're not even, non-point source pollution, right, that we're not even thinking about. It carries it directly into our waterways.
Without being treated.
Without being treated, right.
Like that.
That's one thing that people don't realize is if there are cigarette butts, we'll just use that as an example, in the road, when it rains, those cigarette butts are going to go down the storm drain. That storm drain does not go to any wastewater treatment plant. Instead, it just kind of finds its way to the closest waterway and eventually gets dumped into Presque Isle Bay or Lake Erie. No treatment at all. So the runoff goes directly into the water. So that's one of the threats. We also have climate change and extreme weather events. Mm-hmm. We have plastic.
We know we've seen extreme weather events lately.
Right.
I reference the major, I think 2017 we were hit the hardest, maybe going into 2018, but we got hit with that flood right around Father's Day, the tornado in November of that year, and the Christmas blizzard. I mean, those were extreme back to back to back. And, overseeing the Mill Fair compost facility, when all of those limbs and trees, when all of that came down, we were inundated. And, we're a 5-acre facility, and we couldn't almost handle all of the debris. And I think it is 2020, and we are finally catching up now on what was brought to us in 2017.
Yeah.
So
I think if you look at, I'm not going to tie the high water levels directly to climate change right now, but one of the things that is predicted to happen with a changing climate is things like really high water levels sometimes, but also really low water levels at other times. So again, kind of extremes, and those will impact water quality as well.
And I want to go back to litter real quick because it made me think of this. I know that there is a boom or a litter catch at the basin to Millcreek, right along the wastewater treatment plant. And to see this litter boom is very interesting. It has caught, like you said, cigarette butts and numerous other things that have made their way down Millcreek. But there are not litter booms all along the lake. I mean, there are other times where we cannot catch it, and it's going straight into the lake.
Yeah.
So, and what were some of the other things? You mentioned there were 5. If you just
Sure. So surface runoff, climate change and extreme weather, fracking waste coming into the community, not fracking itself necessarily, but fracking waste coming into the county, and plastic nurdles or plastic pellets. They're getting into our streams. So
and that would be the microplastics?
Well, microplastics are a little bit different. Microplastics often are, I guess they can be considered microplastics, but often when we talk about microplastics, that's more plastic that has gotten into our waterways and has broken down in the environment into tiny pieces.
Okay.
These plastic nurdles or plastic pellets are actually the virgin material that's used to make plastic things, plastic packaging. And so we have a lot of companies in our region who use those nurdles to produce their plastic products. They're so small, though, that as they're being transported, as they're being transferred, as they're being used, they escape really easily. And we know that they're escaping at all of those points. And we know that they're on our streams, and we know that they're on the beaches at Presque Isle.
Okay.
And the problem with that is wildlife can eat them, and then they get the plastic and the plastic chemicals inside their bodies. But also, when they're sitting out in the water, they can attract persistent organic pollutions, so things like PCBs. And so now they're like little tiny bottles of persistent organic pollutants that then fish can eat or birds can eat. So that's why they're a problem.
Okay, all right, that makes a lot of sense. I envision when you just said they just spread through the community. My daughter just broke one of my necklaces, and all the beads went everywhere, and that's like what I picture these, plastics doing, just kind of migrating through the community. And like you said, they're just very small, so it happens quickly. So there's a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of things. What can viewers do, maybe in our everyday lives, to, collectively, I know I'm one person, but collectively, if everybody on my street or if all my friends and family do something, what would make a big difference?
So I think the first thing that we need to recognize is that everything that we do that involves water is going to impact the water. So from the time you wake up and you brush your teeth and you take a shower, those products that you're using are going down the drain, and that water will go to the wastewater treatment plant, but those materials, those chemicals may not all come out. The treatment plant is not there to remove those chemicals. So they're getting out into Lake Erie, and Lake Erie provides our drinking water. So everything we do impacts the water. I think to kind of get back to more immediate threats, though, everything we put on our lawns gets into the water. Your fertilizer, your pesticides. So I think reducing those as much as you can is really important. and also kind of learn about some more native landscaping or more environmentally friendly landscaping that can help kind of absorb water, especially storm water, and will reduce that runoff and reduce the chemicals that are getting into our waterways.
Okay. Do you think, and not naming, any names or products or companies, but do you think some fertilizers and pesticides can be greener than others, or do you think we should stay away from it altogether?
I guess I would recommend staying away altogether.
That's been my philosophy as well.
Yeah.
I've been looking for green products, but I haven't
The thing
made
is,
the switch.
so your fertilizers that you're putting on your lawns, they're going to have nitrogen and phosphorus and a few other things. Nitrogen and phosphorus, whether they're organic or whatever the source is, if you're putting too much fertilizer on your lawn, if you're doing it too often, and then it rains, all that excess fertilizer is going to get into the water. It doesn't matter. It's nitrogen and phosphorus. It doesn't matter what the source really is. It's still getting into the water. And the problem there is that those are nutrients for algae and plants for algae and plants that are in the water, and that then can cause harmful algal blooms, right, or other algae blooms that are a nuisance. So that's the issue.
Okay, that makes sense. And before our show comes to a close here, we have just a couple minutes left. But what else is PennFuture working on all across the state?
Sure. So we do we're part of a lot of different campaigns across the state, especially water campaigns and various coalitions across the state that are geared toward improving water quality, preventing pollution from getting into the waterways. But we're also part of a coalition called Reimagine Appalachia that is geared toward kind of developing more sustainable economy across Appalachia. And then we're also working toward cleaner energy infrastructure and promoting policies that promote that. And the last thing I'll say is we have recently published a green stimulus and recovery platform for Pennsylvania. And it basically says, people, because of COVID-19, people aren't able to work, or people have lost their jobs. And so here's a different way. Let's reimagine what this economy can look like, and here's a different way to put people back to work in a more green economy. Things like a conservation corps or improving water infrastructure that will help everyone and also help the environment.
Wonderful. Well, Sarah, is there, again, we have just 1 minute left. Is there just one big takeaway message we should leave our viewers with today?
Sure. I think the big takeaway message is that our lives rely on our water resources, and we can take them for granted, especially in a place like the Erie region where we have fresh water is very abundant. And so I guess the take-home message is that everything we do impacts our water resources, and we need to recognize that and make sure that we keep that in mind when we're making decisions and really kind of keep that at the forefront of that decision-making process.
Well, I want to thank you so much. Our viewers can check out your website. I assume PennFuture's on social media as well.
Yep, we're on Facebook and Twitter.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah, so much for being here with us today and really, again, bringing this to the forefront. I know we're in a pandemic, but I think this is really the time also to slow down, to kind of freeze and reset and really take a look at what is really important to us, as a human population. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Viewers, again, we learned so much today about the Lake Erie watershed. We are home to thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people that use Lake Erie as their freshwater drinking resource. So again, we touched on a couple of things that we can do to impact our lake in a beneficial way. But if you have more questions, please go to PennFuture's website for more information. I want to thank you for tuning into the Millcreek Government Channel, and until next time, have a great day.